6 штатов вашей прекрасной страны США признали независимость Нагорно-Карабахской республики. Я хочу узнать, какова ваша позиция к решению этой проблемы? Личная позиция и позиция НАТО в решении Нагорно-Карабахской проблемы войны, военной агрессии Азербайджана против народа Нагорного Карабаха. И маленький ремарка, огромное спасибо, мы долго вас за вами следим. Вот. Ну, когда Македония станет членом НАТО? Спасибо.
Those are two not so simple questions, not one simple question, but and by the way, I don't have in this current job, I don't have a personal opinion. I am the representative of NATO, so I will stress that point in answering you. But first of all, I did mention the Bucharest summit decision from 2008, and that focused actually on 4 countries, including the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. I also mentioned Ukraine and Georgia. So, as I said, those are essentially the Bucharest summit decision stands. So they are still among the countries that NATO is looking at now. But I want to stress again, coming up to the summit meeting in July of 2018, that no decisions have been made, and we will have to see what happens. As you know, with Macedonia, they need to work out the name question with Athens. So Skopje and Athens, I know, have been having some pretty intensive discussions even in recent weeks. So I, for one, hope that they will be able to move toward a resolution. But it's, again, one of those bilateral issues that NATO, from where we sit in Brussels, we don't try to facilitate, we don't try to interfere. It's up to Macedonia and Greece to figure that one out. So we will see what happens. I don't know when the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia will become a member of NATO. It's somewhat up to them, and it's somewhat up to the resolution of some bilateral issues with Greece. By the way, they still have some work to do on military reform and political reform, having gone through a long period of political instability and difficulties. So they are, I would say, on a very positive trajectory now, but they still have reform work to do there as well. On Nagorno-Karabakh, you know, I worked for President Clinton back in the 1990s, and I remember very much the early days of the crisis then. I regret that, 25 and more years have gone by, and the conflict is still unresolved. Again, this is a case where I think it's very important for Azerbaijan and Armenia to be working together. I was glad that the foreign ministers got together in the OSCE ministerial meeting, well, on the margins of the OSCE ministerial meeting 2 weeks ago in Vienna. The presidents have met recently in October. I think that is excellent. I know the Minsk co-chairs and Rex Tillerson was at NATO, and then he went to the OSCE meeting. I was delighted that the United States at such a high level is again engaging as one of the Minsk co-chairs, along with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, the French, of course, also involved. So I, from a NATO chair, we only hope to see new momentum in resolving that crisis, and I think it will be good for this entire region if it can be resolved. And I, on behalf of NATO, would just say that we are very positively glad to see the recent high-level diplomatic efforts and hope that it will get there soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Gottemoeller, for your nice presentation. I'm Elmas Solomonian, academic secretary of Yerevan State University and also teacher in the International Relations Department. My question is about identity. You, as a representative of institution of collective security, of an international institution, have corresponding role and identity. At the same time, you are a US citizen. So you represent the United States and you have also identity and role of US national. To what extent these two roles and identities can be compatible? Or did you ever witnessed contending or conflicting identities on your example? Thank you.
Well, I'm going to break the rule that I just put down on the table to say I'm not here representing myself, but representing the NATO alliance. So I will make a personal remark with apologies to the previous questioner. I have to say, quite honestly, it's been a brand new experience for me becoming an international civil servant in my career, either as an academic, working at RAND, working at the Carnegie Endowment, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, or as a diplomat, working for President Clinton, President Obama. I've always been an American, first and foremost. Now suddenly I'm arriving at the NATO headquarters in Brussels as the Deputy Secretary General, and by the way, the first female Deputy Secretary General, and suddenly I am, as I mentioned a moment ago, an international civil servant, working with 29 countries around the table and trying to do my best, along with Secretary General Stoltenberg and other members of the international staff, to gain consensus on important issues. So for me, from being an American to being NATO Deputy Secretary General, full stop. Because honestly, when you enter the international staff, you're supposed to leave your nationality and your citizenship at the door and be a representative of the entire organization. But honestly, and here I'm being very honest, people do still call from Washington and say, can you help with this or that, or help us, fix something? So I would say probably the lines of communication are, I'll put it this way, excellent with Washington, and they still do take advantage of having someone at a high level in the organization who happens to be an American. But to end my answer, I will also say that in this role of Deputy Secretary General, I do have an open door, and so all members of the alliance have come to me. And I find the more I'm in the job, and I'm only in this job just 1 year and a few months, so I'm still learning the job. As we say in American English, I'm still getting my feet under my desk. So I am finding that increasingly all the allies are coming to my door and saying, can you help with this, that, or the other problem? And so I take that as a sign that somehow I'm shedding my Americanness as time goes on and becoming more and more the international civil servant.
Thank you. Դուք հորիորդ։ Դուք չէիք ձեկ բարձացել։
Thank you very much for passing me the voice. I'm Sinan Piavanian, the Faculty of International Relations. I would like to thank you for your being here, for your presence. And as for my question, as we all know, the two contradicting parts of the Cold War were NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Both the NATO and the Warsaw Pact led to the expansion of military forces and their integration. After the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, NATO still exists with above-mentioned activities. My question is, who does this expansion lead to be against when the Warsaw Pact does no longer exist? Thank you beforehand.
As I have mentioned, that NATO is a defensive alliance and also a political military alliance. It is an alliance, as we see it, that brings certain principles to bear on the international stage. And so it is defending, in a way, not only territory, but also principles of international law, like territorial integrity and sovereignty, I think, are at the forefront of the list. And so, in a way, I don't like to think of NATO as being an alliance against anyone or any country, but an alliance that stands for certain important principles and rules of international law, and is ready to defend allies if anything should happen that impinges on their basic rights of territorial integrity, for example. The other thing that I think NATO stands for very strongly is dealing with some of these new and modern threats that are confronting us. I mentioned a moment ago the threat of terrorism, and I think that's an excellent example of how NATO stands for defending against non-state actors who would cause violence to the public, to innocent citizens, who would really try to undermine the basic framework of our peaceful life. I know it sounds maybe a little bit like a cliche, but it's for everyone to be worried about terrorism today. And it's very important that we have defense institutions who are ready to stand and defend when there are non-state actors who really have these unpredictable ways of attacking, and you need to be ready. There are other brand new, I would say, just in the last decade or two, threats that are emerging, and particularly in the cyber realm, cyber attacks that we have had to think hard about how to defend. So it's really an organization that is quite resilient and looks to the future and considers new threats. And that's maybe the last point I'd like to stress in answering your question is we don't see a return to the Cold War. We see a different world nowadays, and it is a world that is defined by different challenges and different threats. And so NATO has to be thinking in terms of how to defend against this wider array of threats and challenges.
Dr. Baron Petrosyan, actually I'm the head of the chair of international relations and diplomacy at the Arayik University. My question is about Iraqi Kurdistan and Iraq. Actually, I have made a field research in Iraqi Kurdistan, and I would like to know NATO's official position on Iraq, on Kurdistan regional government, especially after the independence referendum, taking into account the fact that Baghdad reoccupied the disputed territories, and there are some cleavages and very difficult relation between the two parties. So what is NATO's official position, and what is the best case scenario for NATO in Iraq? Thank you.
The basic rules I've been talking about throughout our discussion this morning apply in Iraq as well. And so NATO stands for territorial and integrity and sovereignty of Iraq too, but particularly territorial integrity. And we urge the government in Baghdad to work closely and in a positive way with the Kurdish government, which has been a force for stabilization and for economic development and for generally improving the overall outlook of the country. And so we've been urging the Baghdad government to focus on unity, to focus on ways to work with the Kurds, to provide for perhaps some special status for them. But again, it's not that NATO is the negotiator, the facilitator. We are urging certain policies that then will be, we hope, carried forward by the Baghdad government, working with the government of Iraqi Kurdistan. But it's not for us to solve the problem, so to say. But we are very clear, once again, that we stand for territorial integrity and sovereignty at the same time that for groups who have some autonomous characteristics to them, that special arrangements may need to be worked out, and that's for the central government to work out with the Iraqi Kurds. what NATO's goals are. They've changed in recent years, and Jens Stoltenberg, my boss, the Secretary General, likes to stress that what we are doing now, not only in Afghanistan, but increasingly in Iraq as well, is to give them the tools, the resources to be able to maintain security and stability over time in those countries. So it's basically what we call a train the trainers kind of approach. So we have in Afghanistan Resolute Support Mission now as a train, advise, and assist mission. It's not a combat mission. What we are doing is training not only the Afghan National Army, but also the Afghan police forces to be able to defend territory in Afghanistan. Our operation now, our activities, I should stress, in Iraq are rather more modest. They are modest, as we put it in the Warsaw Summit, to be modest and scalable. Now we are looking for ways to scale up our activities in Iraq. I mentioned a moment ago that we already have this project with the Serbs, Germans, and Belgians to develop more military medical experts for Iraq. Another important project is to help the Iraqis learn how to repair their Warsaw Pact era equipment. They have a lot of vehicles and other kinds of military equipment that's Warsaw Pact era, and they need to know best how to repair it. So we have other courses that are devoted to maintenance of Warsaw Pact era equipment. You can see it's kind of straightforward and pragmatic kinds of projects, and we're looking for ways to scale up those projects over time. One thing we haven't talked about yet this morning is so-called UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. That's another area where we are working in Afghanistan and also would like to do more work in Iraq. And by the way, I'll be doing a speech in just a few moments for the workshop that's going on that will address this 1325 issue more fully. But I just wanted to say one word about special ways that we try to work on 1325 issues. We try to, again, to be very pragmatic and focused. So in Afghanistan, we wanted to encourage them to bring more women into the police forces. And by the way, I understand that's a direction also that Armenia has been taking, to try to train more women and bring them into the police forces. And I think that's very good for a more efficient and effective police force. Frankly, we've seen a lot of statistics that when women come into the police forces, for example, in Ukraine, the level of corruption went down. So I think it's an important direction to look at. And in Afghanistan, we did something very simple. We built dormitories for the women, because obviously in a society like Afghanistan, they couldn't live in co-ed dorms. They had to have their own space to live safely while they were being trained. So again, it's very straightforward, it's very pragmatic, it's very simple, but those are the kinds of projects that NATO likes to undertake. We like to say we keep it simple, but we try to make the foundation strong so that progress can occur when countries are training and developing new capabilities, such as having women in the police forces. There's one over there.
Vercha, the last question, please.
Good morning. My name is Musara Tamara. I'm the third-year student of the Faculty of International Relations. Thank you for your visit. So my question, recently the US approved the sale of Javelin anti-tank missiles to Georgia, causing some criticism even in the US Congress. What NATO's opinion on that? Thank you.
This is a question that often comes our way because a lot of countries are asking NATO for military equipment and weapon systems. And again, it is up to NATO member states to make those decisions about training, not only training, but sales of weapons or provision of weapons, licensing weapon systems to various countries. So this is really, from our perspective, from NATO's perspective, a bilateral matter between Washington and Tbilisi. It's not something that NATO was involved in any way. And I want to stress that once again, that It's an important question, an important set of questions. It's being grappled with now in Washington, also with regard to Ukraine, whether or not to send defensive weapons to the Ukrainians. I don't know where that decision will come out because, again, it's not up to NATO. It's not NATO's responsibility. But we do provide for, as I said, training and trying to advise and assist countries to be able to be more effective. We have an excellent relationship with Georgia and a very large expert group there working. In fact, we have the head of the NATO liaison office, Ms. Rosario Polisi, here with us today. She's also representing the South Caucasus in her work in Georgia. So I'm really very glad she's here with us today. But in terms of, the sale or the provision of Javelin from the United States to Georgia, NATO doesn't have a position per se on that. That's up to those countries to decide.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, time is over because I know that you have another meeting at the university. Thank you very much. Շնորհակալ եմ շատ այսօր հանդիպման համար եւ թույլ տվեք նվիրեմ մեր հյուրին մեր գրքերից. Let me give you two books. One booklet. This is booklet of our Yerevan State University.
Great.
This is top 50 sites of Armenia for you.
Super.
And album of our famous painter Shmavonyan.
Lovely. Thank you very, very much.
Mr. Markarov, please.
All right.
Carry
Okay, but before I hand over the books, Director, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Can I apply?
Yeah. Yes.
I wanted to say thank you
Sure.
to you all. You have obviously an excellent faculty here of international relations and politics. Your questions have been excellent, and I truly enjoyed our early morning meeting. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.